Welcome to this Sahara 4 exercise. In this exercise, we will use the tool grid operations to create from two previous maps a new map of a calculated variable. In general, grid operations are can be considered also as map operations, which are going to be used to generate new grids by means of equations or relationship between other grids, or also other variables or constants that can be also defined. Here, first we will go to the grid operation window by opening your Sora project and going to tools, and here grid operations. So what we will see here is a number of default equation or relationships that we can use to modify or do grid operations, to modify the maps in general. For example, let's select here, we have pore volume here. Here we can use these different options to create a pore volume map. For example, here we have the net thickness. Here, something important to consider is that if we have the variables defined as I, J, and K, we are talking about a map because it has an X, Y, and C or data. It's defined by three values: a coordinate and a value. So it's going to, in this case, any time that in this window we are talking about a variable that here between parentheses it has three different I, J, and K, we are talking about a map. However, here, for example, we see that we have a single letter here, the K letter, which means that here we don't have a number of coordinates. Here we just have the value, and in general, this will refer to the data that is stored at the layer, at the layer level. Here in edit, we will see here, for example, that was porosity just at the layer level. So here we will have, between these options, we will find porosity. Here, no, original data, no, static data probably. Here we have phi. Now, if we have, for example, phi and it has just one k between parentheses in the other window, we are talking about this phi. This means that in this case we can define. Let's go back to the grid operation window. The pore volume can be calculated from a porosity map or the porosity, multiplying the porosity map by the net thickness map, or it can be defined by using the net thickness map and multiplying it by the value in the layer edition window defined for porosity in each layer. Here we can see that we have defined all the options for pore volume can either be coming from different maps of thickness, here gross thickness, net thickness, and so on and so on, or it can be defined also from porosity, that can come from a map of porosity, or as the one that we calculated previously, or also the value of porosity stored at the layer level. But for example, if we go here to net pay can be defined as just net thickness, or we can, for example, use a constant here that can be defined here. That is always going to be unitless without any unit. And here we can define a constant that we will use to multiply the net thickness to create the net pay map. Here we have more and more options, but all of them will either be constants defined with this letter here, or there will be coming from a map, as we see here with three different letters, or coming from a value that has only one dimension, that normally comes from the layer edition window. Another thing important to consider here as well is that you can add new map variables here that can be listed in this list here by going to variables. Let's do an example. Let's go to variables, map. Let's create a new map variable that we will call, let's call it map example. This is going to be a map variable created by the user. We will use calculated because we want to use grid operations to relationship to do the relationship between different values. In this case, we can define as unit less, won't make any difference. And here, let's say that the thing that we want to compare is I don't know. Let's say gross thickness minus. Well, it should have some data coming. Let's do it with just maps. Let's compare maps net thickness. No, gross thickness minus I don't know, let's say net thickness, just as an example. Let's click it here. So we could use thickness as a unit, as the result unit here, just to be consistent. Here we will use thickness. So we have now our variable that is going to do this calculation that we define. And here, by going to tools, grid operation, now we see that we have the calc map should be here. For volume, net thickness, map example here. And here we see that we have the relationship that we define for this map example variable. We have it here in the net thickness, sorry, gross thickness minus net thickness. So you can add your own variables here, and they're going to be defined by the equation that you define in the variable, the operation that you want to do. So let's move on with the example. Here the idea is to calculate the pore volume that we have these options here to calculate it. In this case, we will select, we have both the porosity and the net thickness map, so we will use both of them to have more precise result. In the case that we use this one, we will multiply by we are going to have basically the same net thickness map, but multiplied by a constant porosity depending on each layer. So as we created in the previous exercise the porosity map for each layer, we will use this option here, and we will use the net thickness map which has been imported. Remember that both of them, we created the pore volume map, sorry, the porosity map, sorry, as in the same shape as the net thickness map, so they are going to be completely coincidental. We shouldn't have any issue with that. And here we can define options to limit the calculation area. For example, we can use the borders if we want to further limit the 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 calculation area of this grid operation. However, it doesn't make much sense because we know that we have the same shape for the net thickness and the porosity map, because that's how we create the porosity. That's how we created the porosity map. So doesn't make much sense to limit it. Here we can use another map as a template for the calculation area. The same process that we did for the mapping tool in the previous exercise. However, we won't select any of these options because it is already limited in a sense by the way the porosity map was calculated. However, just know that you have these options available. And here we can select which layers will be calculated. Let's use this one coming from the first one. So yeah, so we will click calculate here, and we see that we have a problem with this map, the porosity map in the 29 layer. We can check, probably we don't have any porosity value for that layer, but other than that everything was calculated correctly. So now if we go to maps here, we have the 4 maps here. This one is imported, this one is imported, and this one as well. This map was created based on the petrophysical data that was imported in exercise 8 in the previous exercise, in the mapping exercise, using this tool, the mapping tool. And here we have the new map that we will add, that now we see that it's available pore volume. So now we have another map, the pore volume map, that will show us the result of multiplying the net thickness map by the porosity map, giving us this pore volume result. Here we can check what happened with the layer 29. We see that we don't have any value here, and exactly we have net thickness available, but there is no registered value of porosity for this layer, because as you can see we don't have much net thickness. Also probably the layer yeah, the layer is quite small. The is At least in this area of the project, it is quite limited. So that's why we don't have any porosity value, and that's why we receive this error message, uh, that we don't have any porosity, so it couldn't calculate the pore volume. But for all the other layers, we have the ones that have data, we have our pore volume map for each one. So you can see that the porosity and the net thickness map are going to be coincidental with this pore volume. So the pore volume was calculated only where we have really net thickness. That was the idea from the start. Obviously, we will have a different development of each different layer. That's going to be dependent on the geology that we have and the amount of data that we have available. But this is the intended result. So thank you for watching, and I hope you have a great day.